Let's take a look at an example that demonstrates some exception handling. And it's going to be a pretty straightforward example. I'm going to bring two numbers in, divide them, and return the answer. So I'll do a File, New Project. Choose the Windows there. Call this example exception handling. And I'll bring in two numbers. So I need two labels, two text boxes. I need a button to click. There's the button. And then I'm going to return the answer to a label, but it has to have its own label indicating what it is. Okay, there we go. So nothing fancy. Let me highlight all of them, and then I'm going to choose under the properties, I'm going to choose a font. And then change the size to 20. Okay. Now let me move these two down a little bit. This button down a little bit and increase its size. I want to change the text on this label to say num1 or number 1. I'll change this one to say number 2. I'll change this button to say divide. And then I'm going to change this to say answer. And then a label here, I'll change it to say 0, just so it says something initially. Now I want to do some naming. This box I'm going to name TB num1. So I'll go up to the name property. TB num1. This one I'll call TB num2. And I'm going to put my answer in this label here, so I'm going to name it LB answer. I'll click divide, and I declare a couple of variables, num1, num2, and I guess I need quotient too, now that I'm talking this through. So quotient, now num1 is going to equal to int.parse and then tb underscore num1.text. Num2 is going to equal to int.parse tb underscore num2.text. Our quotient is going to equal to num1 divided by num2, and then I want to return that to the answer label. So lb answer.txt equals quotient dot toString, beginning parentheses, closing parentheses, and then semicolon. So let's run this, and I'll put 4 in here, put 2 in here, click divide, gives me 2. Now let me put 0 in for number 2. So we're going to have 4 divided by 0. So if I divide, I see I break it. And it specifically tells us system divide by 0 exception. Well, we'll come back to that. I'm going to go ahead and click break, and then I'll stop it by clicking the square button here. It says stop debugging, or do a shift F5. Well, anything that potentially could break, you put a try around it. And if you got multiple lines that could break, you put a try around all of them. Like I put a try here. And once we put the try, we want to put our beginning braces. I'll come down here. I'm going to indent these a little bit, just because I want them to clearly be underneath that code. Probably I don't need to put the next line in the try. Then I'll do a end brace and catch, and then I'll say exception EX, and then I'll put in a message box dot show in EX dot message. Now, part of the problem is when you leave your code out. Notice this down here. It says use of unassigned local variable quotient. Why is it unassigned? We didn't get that before. It's unassigned because it's within this try, and it's possible that might not actually be assigned a value. One or two ways you can do this. You can take this line here and put it within the main block here. Or you can put another line up here where you just simply set quotient equal to 0 initially. Okay. Now if I run this, now if I put in my 4 divided by 2, works just like before. But now if I put in a division by 0, let's see what happens. Tempted to divide by 0 gives me some kind of halfway friendly message, and then I can click OK. And my program did not crash. It keeps on running. That's the idea behind exception handling, is that it handles whatever exception might occur gracefully. Okay. Well, I'm going to deliberately break it up here. Say num1 is equal to int.parse and tb num1.text. Okay. And let me come down here, and at the very beginning of that line, let me put some comments. This is how you can comment out the code so it won't run it. Okay, so I put the num1 is equal to int parse1 outside of the try, which means that I could potentially break it. So let me try to run it. It's supposed to be an integer, so let me put in 2.31. And I'll put in 1 here. And click divide. And you see that it broke under a format exception. So click break, stop that. That's what happens when you got it outside of the try. But let me delete that and uncomment this. And so let's run it. So I got 4.13 divided by 2. Click divide, and it says input string was not in the correct format. And then I could go and change it to whatever it should be, like put 4 there and so forth. So anything contained from where the try, and then you got your beginning brace, anything contained in those first braces, if there's something wrong with your code and it crashes at runtime when the user's running it, then it'll display the message box. Now let's look at this a little bit closer. Okay, it tries all this. Let's say num1 breaks right here. And then it comes down to the catch, and it runs the code here. It will not do the rest of the lines of code in your program, so it won't do the rest of those. That's an important item to keep in mind, because later on we'll take a look at this in a little bit more detail, and maybe you want to program it differently. So again, if this line crashes, causes an exception, it jumps down to here and prints this. Now this exception you see in a different color here, this refers to a particular component of programming that means something went wrong. It's defined, And this gives it a name. This be like a human, and then David would be the name. Human is defined of all the different characteristics that go with being a human. Exception is defined with all the different characteristics that go with being an exception in a program. And then this can be whatever you want to call it. This is a variable, and I called it EX, the pattern after the book. But you could call it anything. Like I could call it my message, like that. And then if I come down here, or my error. Let me change that to my error. There we go. Now, if you're wondering what else could you do with it, nice part about Visual Studio is if I type in my error and do a dot, it'll pop up with all the different things I can access. Message gets a message that describes the current exception. Source gets or sets the name of the application or object that causes the error. Stack trace, target site, toString, inner exception gets the exception instance that causes the current exception. H result, read that, help link, so forth. Gets or sets link to the help file associated with this exception. I'll get rid of that. Don't get stressed out about that. The thing about programming is you know the basics, you can get up and running. And then if you find that you need to program some special technique in your program, that's when you can Google it, you can look it through books, and you can maybe use one of those. About the only thing I've ever used off of like my error would be the message. Doesn't mean I haven't programmed other exceptions, which we'll see that later in the course, but that's the only one I've actually used in within the code for doing the catch. Because again, if something goes wrong, it'll do the code that's right here. Now that code might be to set a variable, like num1 is equal to 0 and num2 is equal to 0. So it might be something else than showing a message box. But that's an example of exception handling. I'll go ahead and save that and close it. Make sure you do closed solutions